Welcome! I'm so glad you're here. I'm Gila Ross, parenting educator and coach, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Confident Parent podcast, bringing you the content you need to bring more ease, joy and love into your parenting so that you can show up as the parent you want to be to your children. All right, welcome everyone. We are super excited to have Chavie in the studio with us today. So Chavie is a mom from Montana. She lives in Montana with her 5 adopted kids, and I met her over Instagram. And I instantly fell in love with her account, the way she shows her kids, her lives, and it was just like, when I saw her account, I was like, I need to speak to her. I need to get her on the podcast. We need to hear more about it. So welcome, Chavie. We're really excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. Why don't you start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I am 37 years old. I live in Bozeman, Montana. My husband and I have a Chabad house, and what that is a Jewish outreach center where we are a central location and destination for any Jew in Montana or visitor that wants to connect with their Judaism in any way, in a small way, in a big way. And so that's what we do. And we love it. Bozeman is awesome and beautiful. And the people are awesome and beautiful as well. My husband, we've been living there for over 14 years. We've been married for over 15 years. And we have been, early on in our marriage, we were diagnosed with permanent infertility. And that has changed the trajectory of our life and how we thought our life was going to be. But we pivoted and we figured out how to live the best life with what God has provided. And we decided to grow and build our family through adoption. And we have now 5 adopted kids. And it is beautiful, hard, painful, glorious, tragic, all at once, like it's all the feelings. Oh, wow. So I started to share more about my story. I have a blog called clearasma.blog and on Instagram, where I just share my musings and my experiences through my own lens. Like, I'm not here to tell anybody how to do things, how to feel, what's right, what's wrong. It's just how I move through this world and deal with the unique set of challenges that I have.
So wow, that is quite the journey. So tell us a little bit more about the 5 kids that you've adopted.
Yes. Okay. So literally, like, I can write a book about each adoption and each process and each experience and continued experiences. So very briefly, we adopted our first child almost 12 years ago. She was born in Russia 9 weeks early and with very severe medical complications. And she was brought to the United States for medical treatment. And then her birth mom decided that, that it wasn't going to work, and she wanted to have her child adopted. And by a lot of miracles, we were contacted and we adopted her, I want to say 11 and a half years ago. She's awesome. She's doing beautifully. She's having a bas mitzvah in August, and she was our first. And then 10 months later, we adopted ZC, who was our second child, who took us on a journey of her own. She has like a rare genetic disorder called GLUT1, and very briefly, her brain doesn't process glucose, which means her brain isn't fueled properly And it affects the whole brain, including seizures and developmental delays and all that kind of stuff. Took us 5 years to figure out what was happening because it's very rare and it's hard to diagnose. But we did, and she's on a ketogenic diet, a medical version of ketogenic diet, which is not the fad version. And she's doing also wonderfully. My son is 8. We adopted him in Baltimore or Maryland, and he is Black. So he adds another diverse dimension to our family briefly. And then my daughter Shoshana, who's just turned 17, we adopted her at 12, 5 years ago. So that was a whole very unique experience and very, very beautiful, but very challenging. It's very different to adopt a baby and different to adopt almost a fully developed human, with 12 years of, previous experiences, mostly negative, So, and then my daughter, Hanalea, who's almost 4, we adopted her. She was born in Montana, and she's our youngest. So that's in the briefest form I can pull off, but there's a lot there,
Wow, so much respect, because wow, I'm sure, as you said, you could write a book about each one, and each child is their story of their adoption and how they joined your family, and I'm sure how they fit into your family. How do you go about integrating this? I mean, this diverse family that you have, a lot of regular families. I don't know how you like to refer to that. We struggle with our kids and getting on, and here you've got an older child coming into the family and children from all over. What tips, what strategies do you use to form this, to build, as you said, build a family from these beautiful individuals?
It's a really good question, because I think to me it's a two-part answer. First of all, it's, on the one hand, it's you do the things you do. Like, on the one hand, it's like a regular family, right? Like, everyone has their personalities, everyone has their things. It's busy, it's hard, whatever. But I would say that there is there's a huge added dimension to that. And my biggest thing right now is just being intentional. Like, what is my end goal, right? And so that has helped me through a lot of things, because sometimes we get so stuck in a certain scenario, or a certain, this is right, this is wrong, or I want my children to have this value, or I want them to, behave, and I want them to do this, and I want them to be successful. And sometimes we get so stuck, or we're teaching them a lesson, or disciplining, or whatever. And I sometimes have to stop myself and be like, well, what's my end goal here? What am I trying to accomplish as a whole? And that has really helped in a lot of the decisions that I make. So to answer your question, I have to be really intentional about how I want my family to connect. And it doesn't always come naturally. And there is a lot of, there's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of deep feelings. And let me tell you, it's a big deal that Chaya was the oldest and then wasn't. And that brings up a lot of stuff that has to be addressed. It has to be talked about. It has to be worked through. It has to be validated. And there's a lot of, all of them, I always kind of laugh when people say, but all kids have different personalities, and all kids are so different. Sometimes you'd never know they come from the same parents. But the fact of the matter is that in general, you have families. Yes, there's a lot of diverse families out there with, stepchildren, or, there's a lot of ways to build a family now. But if you're taking the typical nuclear family, they're coming from 2 parents with the same genetics. And even though kids are different, you don't realize how big of a role having the same genetics play. And it is extremely different to have 5 children with completely genetic makeups. And when most of that is a mystery, you don't even have information. So you don't even know what you're working with, and what are some of the things that are coming from genetics or coming from a, you know, you know, generational trauma or whatever. Like there's so many things there that you don't even know. And I just can tell you from experience, I can't tell you scientifically and I can't tell you all the studies, but I can tell you from living it that having a family with 5 kids with completely different set of genetic makeup is a big deal. And it's not the same as having kids with different personalities. It's just isn't. And it just takes a lot of intention and a lot of work. And I just wrote a blog post about traveling, and that's one of the ways that I really use to build our family connection. Taking family trips, having experiences together, having to do hard things together, having to problem solve together. And at home, as much as you can do that, when there's there's schedule, there's school, there's work, we're all distracted, we're all busy, we're all kind of just getting, living our lives. I think the 10 days or the week, or even like I said last time we took a 2-day trip, and those trips are very, very intentional on my part. And I do them to build our family connection, to intentionally, work together. And it doesn't come by itself. Like, how a marriage like takes work, right? And a marriage doesn't coast, right? Like if you want it to continue to grow with you and work with you, you have to put the work into it. I feel it's the same with your family. If you want your family to feel like they can count on one another, that we're connected, that we're a family, it takes work. You have to put the work into it.
It's true. I'm listening to you, and a couple of things really struck me because I never really thought about it before you listened to it. But sometimes, with my own kids, they'll do something and I'll be like, that comes from, like, I'll turn around to my husband and I'll be like, that comes from you. And it softens the way we react to it because we sort of feel, oh, whatever, he turned out right. Whereas you don't have that with an adopted child.
And I can see, like, people are always like, what is it? Nature versus nurture, right? And there's always this big discussion. And it's a silly discussion because it's both. But I think people, like, especially when they talk to adopted families with adopted children, they want to tell you, oh, it's nurture versus nature, nurture, nurture, nurture. And I'm like, yes, it's nurture is important, but you cannot disregard nature. You can't disregard from who they came. And I can tell you, I see it, I especially see it with my son. And this is just, it is what it is. It's a fact. He has things in him that, are ingrained in him generationally. And the way he moves, the way has rhythm, the way he dances, the way what he connects to, what he gravitates towards. These are not things that he's knowing it from at home. It's not our culture, right? And it just is inborn in him. You can't tell me that doesn't play a role. And whether you want to say it's a stereotype or this or that, you could say whatever you want to say. There are certain things that a child is born with, that instead of ignoring it, instead of saying it doesn't play a role, pay attention to it, enhance it, recognize it, let him explore it. Like, this is who he is, like, and accept it and embrace it. And I just feel very strongly about that, because it's the worst thing to ignore, the nature and who they feel like, and who they feel that they are, regardless of what family they're living in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to, like, the principle that we know in Jewish thought, that educate your child according to their way, so that when they get older, they'll stay with your values. Because if you ignore who they are, you can't do that, right? You've got to work with who they are.
It's tricky. It's it's complicated, and it's tricky, and it's big. But the principle, like that, I mean, if only we can just put aside all our, desires and wants and all the things of how they should be, like, that's the ideal way, right?
Right. But tell me a little bit more about your son, because I mean, you said you're a Chabad family. what's it like as a Chabad, an Orthodox family raising you said he's black or biracial? I can't remember what
He's biracial. He's
biracial.
biracial, but he's black. And
Him, and what's it like for you?
so it's a good question. I can't answer what it's like for him, but I can tell you that as he gets older, he definitely is really exploring more, and I think he's feeling more that he's looks different and unique. And when he was a baby and a kid and a toddler, like it was irrelevant, like it didn't matter. And as he's getting older, it does matter to him. Like he is looking for the connection. He's looking for people that look like him. He's craving that, like that familiarity, like, and he connects to people like who look like him, like Nissan Black, who's his favorite singer. Like he's a Jewish singer who's a black rapper, and it speaks to his soul, right? And these are the things that, this is his own discoveries and his own, like, this is what he gravitates towards, and we honor that. I think, as a Chabad family with a diverse family, like it is what you make it, right? So, I always say the energy you put out is the energy you get back. So it's a very positive experience. It's beautiful. It is what, it's our life. So it is what it is. And people can, judge it. They can respect it. They can be inspired by it. It doesn't really matter, right? To me, because I'm going to live my life the way that honor my values, and the way I, feel true, and just what I am putting out in this world. And whether you feel like it's inspiring or it's ridiculous, I really try not to let that be a part of my journey. And I'm very open about our lives, because I always like say, and also to my kids and whatever, it's like, when you keep a secret, it's usually something that you're not proud of. And I'm not talking about like a surprise, right? There's a difference between a surprise and a secret, but a secret is something that you either feel ashamed about or you don't want anybody to know. And that's why my journey, my infertility journey, my adoption journey, the journey of my children and their mental health journey and their, attachment and, trauma journey, like these are things that we talk about, not in detail, right? Not to talk about these things. You don't have to know every single detail. You don't have to know every single personal, private detail, because there's also a difference between privacy and secrets, right? But when you can talk about the challenges that you're facing, and it's not secret, it is huge. It is huge, because first of all, adding a secret to an already challenging situation is another huge additional burden, which isn't necessary. And I always tell my kids, like, people always say, well, how do you know what to share about your kids? Right? How do you know the boundaries and whatever? I was like, well, it takes work. And sometimes I fail and sometimes I make mistakes. But in general, my rule is that anything that I want them to be proud of, anything I don't want them to be ashamed of, is something that I share. So whether it's their adoption journey or their journey if they have to do something special for their mental health, or my infertility journey, like if I don't want them to grow up being ashamed of it, then it's something that we talk about, because we should be proud of the things that we do. We should be proud of the hard things that we do. And it doesn't have to be something that we keep to ourselves and feel shame about.
That's a very, very good point. That, yes, I like what you're saying, that the things that we don't want to be embarrassed about, yes, we can share them. And I think also as our kids get older, they're very clear with us what we can, what we can't share.
Yeah. And there was a situation where I shared something about one of my daughters, which I felt was appropriate, but she felt differently, and she was able to tell me that. She said, listen, I really don't feel comfortable. And I said, okay, I honor that and I respect that, and I'm sorry that I overstepped a boundary. And thank you for sharing, right? And I'll do better next time.
Yeah.
So as they get older, they definitely do have more of an opinion and a voice, and it definitely needs to be honored. But I also tell my kids, I'm like, this is not only your story, it's my story too, right? So sometimes kids will get very possessive and be like, you can't talk about that. And I'm like, you know what? Certain things, it's my story too, right? And I do get to decide certain things that I get to talk about, that involve me, that involve you in a peripheral way. So nobody has complete control over their own story. And I think that's okay. Like, we have to understand and realize that our stories, we don't live in a vacuum. Your story doesn't happen in a bubble. It doesn't affect other people. And do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's complicated. And at least if we're open and we talk about it, you figure it out.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I find, because I also have a large family like yourself, is that one of the things that's nice is that sometimes you can hide sort of the anonymity of the kids, right? So you can share a story about one of my children, and so the child isn't sort of as exposed. But
oh, for sure.
Sure. No, yes, I do hear that idea of I guess it's the balance between, right, protecting their privacy, and I think also as they. Do you have any teenagers yet? Yes, you have.
Yes, I have a 17-year-old.
Right. Oh, for sure. So
yeah,
when they're teenagers, like, forget it. You mustn't sit.
And one who's turning 12. Like, let me tell you, that's a special age. That is just like, oh my gosh.
Don't tell anyone, but it's my least favorite age. Like 11, 12.
It really is. It's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. Back to your son. Has he encountered any racism?
I want to say there's a difference between kids and people saying things that are insensitive to racism. I think he has encountered some insensitivities, maybe from kids who are just super innocent and exploring, and like, don't mean negatively, but could be offensive to him. And that's something that we talk about all the time. I don't think we've encountered any inherent racism, like somebody who really doesn't believe Black people are worthy or equal of everything as the same as a white person. I don't think we've encountered that. But he did, he has had some incidences in school. He came home from school one day, and it was a very interesting story, and it was complicated to try to pick it apart. But they were learning about, it was around Martin Luther King time, and they were learning about the whole like Rosa Parks era, right? And how it worked with the segregation and the buses, and then they went on a field trip, and one of the kids in the class said, if this was, he said, like last year, right? Because their concept of time is right. You would have to sit in the back of the bus, right? And Manny was like, what? Like, and I think it did affect him, and he came home and we talked about it. But was that comment racist? I really don't think so. I think that comment was, they were learning about segregation. Here there is a Black kid in his class and they're applying what they learned and saying, by the way, a long time ago, like, you would have had to sit in the back of the bus. And it's true. That is unfortunately the truth. So was it something that needed to be addressed and talked about and probably made him feel kind of yucky? Yes. But was it coming from inherent racism? I don't think so. So those are things that, and I also don't think it's positive for anytime your kid encounters an insensitive comment or something that's difficult for them to process, to say, oh my God, that's racist. That kid was racist. And like, I don't think that that's beneficial to your kid. Like, I think it's important for your kid to know, sometimes kids say things that are insensitive and they don't realize. And it's our job to tell that person that really hurt your feelings or that was insensitive and it's not appropriate to say. Like, there are ways to go about it without like blanket statement. Anyone who says anything that's hurtful is automatically a racist.
Yep, I hear that. And I think, look, a comment like that obviously is specific to a child who looks different from his peers. But I think any parent, or I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that any parent who's parenting a child, their child has come across an insensitive statement at some point.
For sure. For sure. Whether you're fat or whether you got pimples or whether, you dress weird. I mean, like, for sure.
Or anything. You bring like the wrong snack for school or whatever, right? So
exactly. Totally.
Do you have any like tips for parents? Because I really like the balance that you bring to it. So what sort of tips do you have to give to parents of how to
I think it's
children process the insensitive comments that they may get?
We talk about this so much at home, because I have some kids that are very sensitive, and I also have some kids that it's a different topic, but I have some kids that don't like embellish stories a little bit, because a child will say something hurtful, or a child will say something maybe a little insensitive, and it makes them feel a certain way. So then they relay the story on how and say it as how they felt, but not exactly what was said. And we have a very big thing in our family is it's important. Your feelings are important and valid, but there's a difference between what was said and how you feel about what was said. Because, and then I come back to the school, I'm like, this and this happened, and it's not a reality. And the truth is, a kid can say something that isn't necessarily insensitive or hurtful, but triggered my child in a certain way. And that's not that kid's fault, right? And we can't put all our feelings on other people. We need to take responsibility for how we feel about something, and know how to differentiate between those two. So that is a huge discussion in our house. And usually when my kid comes home and says a story, I will verify. I will try, to trust but verify, right? I have to dig. I can't just take anything at face value in my house. So I will say, wow, that sounded hard. It sounds like you feel really hurt. Okay, now let's go back. What was said? Okay, and kind of I have to be a little bit of an investigator, because the challenge is that your child wants you to be their advocate, right? And they want you to do something about if they were hurt. And I've learned that if I'm going to be an advocate for them, I've also got to know the story. And I can't just all of a sudden walk into school with guns blazing and saying this and this and this happened when it's not the reality. So I've learned to be an advocate for my child, but also hold them responsible and say, you can't just blame people and put your feelings on how you feel on somebody else. So that's first and foremost, it's differentiating what was said and how you feel about what was said. Now
that's such an important skill, because I think even as
it is huge, and it takes practice.
Yeah,
because it takes a lot of practice, and it is, and usually like I can get to the bottom of it, and usually honestly, like, it's about how they feel about themselves. It's how they're feeling about themselves, and it's easier to put that on somebody else than to own that. And so we talk about that a lot, and at the end, it's always the how they feel is always valid. I say to my child, I'm like, that is 100% okay to feel. It's not okay to say that about somebody else, that they did that to you, or it was, like, so it's important for them to know that there's no wrong feelings. If they're feeling that way, that needs to be addressed. If they're feeling like, I'll give an example, like, and this happened many years ago, so there's really no way of knowing which kid it was, but but one of my children came home saying that this kid said to them that because they're adopted, they don't really have a family. They don't really have a family because they're adopted. I'm like, it's like, that's so weird, because like, I really cannot imagine anybody in that class or in that school saying that. Like, and it just like I'm like, so I did a little investigation, and I'm like, like, that is so interesting. And turns out that nobody ever said that. Nobody ever said that. Not even close. It was my child's way of telling me that this is how they feel.
Right. Wow.
And it's a lot easier to say somebody said that, to say, hey, mom, I don't feel like I have a family because I'm adopted, right? It's a lot easier to be like, this was said to me and I'm very hurt, right? And so that opened up an ability to have a conversation about what's really going in deep inside of them. But if I were to just take everything at face value and, oh my gosh, and someone said this to my child, I would have missed the point. I would have been so busy trying to discipline and make sure that that kid was, whatever. And I would have missed the whole point of what was really happening.
Yeah. 100%. Right. Because it's not about
right. It's about, so I just urge parents, like whenever, and some kids are really like, you can take what they say at face value and are not complicated. I do not have that luxury. Not one of my kids is like that. Can never take what they say at face value. I always have to know and see, well, what's behind that? What's behind what they're saying? And I urge parents to be, sometimes it's not about what they're saying. It's about why they're saying what they're saying.
Yeah.
And if you just pause for a second and try to get a little deeper, sometimes it's exactly what you don't imagine, or we have to focus on the exact thing that we would automatically think we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, that is such a good point, right? To sort of tweak. And I think also our kids learn so much by learning to differentiate what actually happened and how that made them feel, right? Because
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your questions for future episodes. And please take a moment, think about someone else who might benefit from this and forward it on to them. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully, for more insights on how to bring meaning, joy, love into your life based on timeless Jewish wisdom. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out.